Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. We have Tamika, Superintendent and founder from Up Excellence Academy. Tamika, how you doing today?
I am doing amazing. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. And you know what? I failed to mention our sponsor. Before we get into today's conversation, let's mention our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education. If your district needs unrestricted funds, or if your charter school needed funding, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, Tamika. So our listeners would love to hear about your background before we get started.
Awesome. Well, my background is pretty interesting, a little bit different from your typical educator. So I started out in business in the finance arena. So I worked for Invesco for a number of years in finance. And after working for Invesco, I decided to go and get my teacher certification. And with the teacher certification, I have taught K through 12. I spent most of my time in the classroom, K through 5. And then I spent some time as an instructional leader, a campus leader, and I sort of ended that leg of my career doing some independent consulting with a few school districts, really rooted in turnaround work. And so my experience and my background has been a split between both business and education. In addition to being in education, I've also owned a few businesses, a consulting agency that focuses on developing systems and processes for small and medium-sized businesses. And of course, the other was with consulting and turnaround schools. That led me here to where I am now. I'm the founder of Excellence Academy, and it is a merger of both business and education.
And Up Excellence Academy, that's a charter school on the north side of Houston, right?
Yes, it is a charter school on the north side of Houston. So we are authorized for pre-K through eighth grade. Our launch year is this year, the 24-25 school year, where we launch with pre-K through fifth grade.
Very cool. And if you can, walk us through that process a little bit, because it sounds like a big leap from, you know, being a teacher, and then you were a consultant, and then you started an entire school. So that just seems like I would love to hear kind of how all that transpired, and maybe even your thought process, because I don't know if everyone has that kind of ambition or vision to do that. So it'd be kind of cool to hear that piece of it.
You know, Gary, that is good, and I would love to jump into that because for me, it didn't seem like a huge leap. It seemed like the next step for me and the goals and dreams that I not only have for myself but the student body in which we serve. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to tell you about my background in terms of growing up. So I grew up in the inner city of Houston, in the Fifth Ward area. So growing up in the Fifth Ward area, it's a low socioeconomic area where we did not have access to a lot. When I say not having access to a lot, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, high quality academics, and just the environment that was conducive to our cognitive development. So going through school, I was always blessed to have mentors and really great parents who encouraged a love of literacy within myself. So I spent a lot of my childhood inside of the house, reading and learning a lot about the world through the literature that I was reading. And along the journey, I was able to meet teachers and mentors who invested in my education and also my development as a female, and then as a woman as well. But what I noticed is not everyone in my neighborhood had access to the same things that I had access to. So although we were living in the same community, I had my parents, my mom and my dad, who invested in me at home. But neither of my parents were college graduates. They were both high school graduates. So I was the first in my family to graduate college. And I also had mentors and teachers who also invested in my educational and my personal development. And then when I began to look around me and look at my peers, I began to notice a lot of trends. And so what I noticed is that there were a lot of the young women who were having children at young ages. I also noticed that a lot of my peers were not finishing high school. And I also knew that there was a rise in a lot of my peers who were incarcerated. And so as I continued to matriculate through school, one of the things that I asked myself is if I could do anything for little Tamika, right? The younger version of me, because there's always a younger version of me back in my neighborhood, right? And where I grew up. If there's anything that I could do to chart their life on a different trajectory, what would that be? Right? And so what that is having access to high quality education and building a school model that is conducive to strengthening the community, right? And strengthening the community in more than just one way. Because academics is only one part of what it takes to make it out of a community such as mine, right? So there's personal development and there's a lot of teaching that goes into that. So that is what birthed the desire in me to take education a step further so that I could give back to my community in a way that would produce economic mobility. So if you've done some research on Up Excellence Academy, it's not traditional in a lot of respects. So our school model is rooted in entrepreneurship and economics. And so why that's important,
Very cool.
because with entrepreneurship, it's not just about owning a business and making money. Like that is a derivative of what happens when you are when you're going through a process, right? So I always like
Right.
to clarify what I mean by entrepreneurship. I mean thinking, right? Like we are helping to shape a mindset of how to solve problems, how to solve challenges, right? How do you identify things in your community that's working? How do you identify things in your community that's not working? And how do you as a community member become a solution? So that's where economics came into play at. So what we're doing is we're teaching students starting at age 4. And of course, there's a continuum. They're not at age 4, they're not learning the same thing that our 8th grade students are learning. But based on a continuum, we're kind of showing them how the world operates through thinking and through building a community and enhancing the community that you're already in. So when we say making a leap from being a teacher, the average teacher, that would be a tremendous leap from them coming in from a classroom, going into actually building the school model and opening a charter school. It would be hard for them to do that, almost sometimes impossible. But when you're coming from the mindset of this is why I'm doing this, right? And I love that quote from Jim Rohn when he says, when the why is stronger, the how gets easier. So my mindset is always, how can I create something in a community that's going to produce economic mobility? And so for me, that was the mindset behind it. And I can go into how I did it if we want to go into that response as well.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Um, it's interesting you had those. So were those mentors you had, were they from outside your community, or were they just happen to be neighbors or family members or
You know what, Gary? That is a really good question. Not an answer that I'm proud of, but it was definitely outside of my community.
okay.
Um, those mentors were outside of my community. They were coming into the inner city to be teachers, right? And I know there was one program that was called DARE. So there was a group of officers that would come into our school. And I remember the officer's name. It was AJ Washington. He made a very big impact in my life when we used to call him Officer AJ. And so he would actually come to pick my siblings and I up on the weekend and expose us to things that we had not been exposed to. So going to museums and going to different parks and, seeing things outside of our immediate community was very powerful in me shaping my mindset on what is actually powerful. And another teacher that was very impactful to me, I met her when I was in high school. Her name was Mrs. Law, so Miss Danita Law. She would come to school before school and after school to tutor me in math. But while she was tutoring me in math, she had no idea about the things that I was watching, right? So I was watching her appearance, like how does she dress? How does she speak? How does she do all of these things that made what I considered to be successful at that time. And so most of the mentors that I had along the way, some were direct mentors, some were indirect mentors, but I would say 100% of them were outside of my community.
That's interesting though. I mean, just by the way you're reflecting on it, it sounds like they probably saw something in you because I don't think every student would be willing to stay after and do math and and do the things that you did, and just kind of the way you're describing it sounds like you processed it in a very intelligent way. So I imagine they saw that in you as well. Like, man, this little girl has a lot of potential. Um, Very cool. So, I see the why there. I see the inspiration. I see, you being surrounded by people and you having that compassion for, which says a lot about you as well. I don't, I don't know how many kids, are really compassionate about their, uh, their peers. So that takes a certain level of emotional intelligence as well, especially as a kid. Um, so okay, and I'm sorry, we're getting caught on. I'm just fascinated by your story here. I just think it's just so cool, like just how it all. I mean, I mean, wow. I think people listening in can get a lot out of this, because I think all of us have limiting beliefs about what we can accomplish, and obviously you had that why there because you're coming from that area, and okay, so you took the step. You could have stopped there and just said, "Hey, I'm gonna just become a teacher, right? I'm just gonna, become a teacher," and not and then that's perfectly fine. A lot of people do that, and amazing people do that. But you decided, what, I'm gonna just start a school. What 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 was that like when because you didn't stop. You're like, hey, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna start a school. What did that process look like from like, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this. I mean, how did that transpire?
It takes a certain amount of oh man, tenacity and drive to just keep hammering away at something that others would deem as impossible. And I don't think that I would ever stop. I think that when your passion meets your life purpose, like you get this energetic charge that just doesn't allow you to see a lot of no's or accept a lot of no's. So something interesting happened. So at the time that I started this process, I was traveling. So I was enjoying my life traveling around the United States doing some turnaround work in schools. And that was really cool. But I spent a lot of time away from my family, but I really enjoyed my work. And a friend of mine sent me an email and she said, "Hey, Tamika, in Texas, they're doing this fellowship for individuals who are interested in opening up charter schools. And if anybody can do this, you can do it." She said, "It came to my inbox, but I'm not the right person for it. But if anybody can do this, you can do it." And so I thought about it and I thought about the freedom and flexibility that I had with doing consulting. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. But on the last day that the submission was due, it was on my mom's birthday. And I was sitting at my sister's house and I just separated from the family. I went into the dining room and I just went to work on the application. I submitted it on the last day. And so I start thinking about what was possible for the little Tamikas, right, that were still in that community who did not have access to what success could look like for them or what possibilities could look like for them. So I filled out the application, went through a very rigorous interview process. There were two selections made in the state of Texas for that first round. And I was one of the individuals who was selected for what's considered an incubator. So I went through an incubator for 12 months where they assisted in the application writing process and a lot of the CEO mindset and development. And that was super cool. And so the process, it's very difficult. It is a very difficult process to go through because you go through application writing, then you go through application review, then you have to essentially defend what you wrote in front of the State Board of Education. You have to defend it in front of TEA, and then you have to get the Commissioner of Education's approval in order to open that school.
Just to make sure I'm following correctly, so there are programs out there for people that want to start schools and they get some guidance and support, but they got it's kind of a rigorous process, and then you got to do all this stuff. Is that I'm probably oversimplifying it, but yeah.
No, that is absolutely correct. Like it's a fairly new program. I was the first when the incubator rolled out. I was the first class to go through. So in that class, it was only two of us
And
who passed.
what's the name of the program?
It is a TEA fellowship. That's the name of it. And if it's changed since, I don't know, but if you go on the Texas Education Agency website, you'll be able to find information about the fellowship.
Got it, got it. Very cool. Yeah, that's exciting. So you went through the process and jumped through a bunch of hoops, and then they're like, okay, you get the green light to go.
Yeah, there was a lot of hoops to jump through, but I will always tell people that the process, although it's hard, um, the process is amazing because one of the biggest hurdles that you have to jump through when you're going from employee to employer is mindset development, right? Because you have to first make the leap. And I always tell teachers this when they want to get out of the classroom. It's not that it's so difficult to be an administrator, but what's difficult is the mindset switch of me being responsible for the students who are in my classroom versus me as an administrator pushing results through other people, right? That takes a certain level of knowledge, emotional intelligence, understanding, and then the how do I drive results through other people, right? And that is mostly about you becoming. And so that's a misconception of most leaders. Like it's not about doing as much as it is about becoming a person that others would want to follow and a person that other people would want to take guidance from. And so coming from working in a school, being an employee, and then going into being a consultant, and then now being a CEO and a founder of a public school is a very different mindset because now everything that I do, I have to make sure that I'm keeping every stakeholder in mind and that I keep my eye on the main thing, which is going to be student achievement and development, as well as their safety and emotions as well.
As far as opening the school, funding wise, does the state provide funding? Do you have to raise capital? Do you got to use your own money? I mean, how does that work?
Very good question. So initially, there's no funding. There's no funding from the state until you actually have kids in the building, right? So when you're
Okay.
through this process of finding real estate, hiring new staff, doing marketing, setting up a website, doing all of these things, that's going to come from your fundraising abilities, right? So you have to raise funds in order to get your doors open for the school. So if you're not raising funds or if you don't have the capital yourself,
Hmm.
then it's almost impossible to open the doors. Now there is an initial grant that happens from the agency, but that doesn't happen right away. So say for example, we were authorized, I believe it was either June or July, and you get what's called a year zero. Okay, so for 1 year, you're in the planning and implementation phase before the school opens. But when you're in that planning and implementation phase, there could be anywhere from 6 to 9 months before you ever have access to the agency's grant. But in the
Mhm.
interim, you have to find real estate to open the school. And so you can't use agency grants in order to um, invest in the real estate. So, and to get your doors open. So you have to raise funding. You have to raise funds for that.
So when you're raising the funds, do you have to go to your network, or are there certain people that just love this type of investment? Or is it an investment, or is it just a nonprofit? Or I mean,
It's a
and
nonprofit. It is a
okay.
nonprofit. So normally when you're raising funds, you want to raise funds from foundations and things of that nature, people who understand that it's not a loan. Now, there may be situations in there where you have to get a loan in order to open the doors, but I would typically look for foundation unrestricted funding and people who really understand what this work is like and people who have a passion for this work and then they want to see students be successful in education. So you have to have drive, you have to really understand your why, you have to really understand what you are capable of, and you have to be full of grit in order to get it done.
Mhm.
But most of what you do as a founder and a superintendent is part of that is fundraising. Fundraising is a big part of that.
Wow, what an inspiring story. That's amazing, Tamika. And I know we're running short on time. Just real quick, how long have y'all been open now?
We opened our doors August 14th.
Oh, this past August.
This past August, we just opened. We are
Wow.
brand new. So we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot about who our families are, what our families want, just a ton of things.
And you mentioned north side of Houston. Are you kind of off 45 towards Spring, or where are y'all located exactly?
Yes, we're close to JFK Airport. So we are
Okay.
off of 5 North in the greater Greens Point area.
Oh, okay. That's where I grew up. I long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, part of my life. Um, well, good. Um, well, I would love to have you on again in the future. Once things pick up and get some students in there and we hear some of the success stories. Love to hear some of those next time you're on if you're open to it.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
Awesome. Okay, well, before we close out, any last thoughts or for those listeners or anything you want to share?
I would really encourage listeners to do research on charter schools and what they are really here to do. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about the power of a charter school, the power of parent choice. If you're a parent who's looking for a solution for your child, it doesn't matter which category your child falls in. I would highly encourage you to do research on your local charter schools in the area. And there's ever any questions that you have, feel free to reach out to me. Our website is www.upexcellenceacademy.org, and just be informed so that you're getting the outcomes that you really want for your children.
Love it. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Tamika. Well, there you have it. Before we close out, we do want to give one final shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to schools. And so if your school needs funding, reach out to Ideal Impact. And thank you again, Tamika, for being on on the podcast today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, ma'am. All right. For those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.